This podcast is brought to you by Destination Specialists, one of the longest standing travel agencies in Cebu. So for all your travel needs, go to Destination Specialists. Whenever I plan my travels, whether it be for business or pleasure, I give Destination Specialists a call at 032-231-2461 or check out their website at destinationcebu.com. They've got two branches. One is located at the upper ground level of SM City Cebu in North Reclamation. It's above the food court. And another one is in the second level of Manila Town Center above Dim Sum Break. So whenever you plan to take a trip, give Destination Specialists a call or a visit. Or, if you just want beautiful travel photos on your Instagram feed, you can follow them at Destination Specialists on Instagram. That's Destination Specialists. One other thing I wanted to talk about was, I wanted to ask you, how many times have you listened to 032 Conversations? If you've listened to it a lot and you genuinely think this podcast has been helpful to you, consider supporting us on Patreon. Patreon.com/032 for all the details. This allows you to monetarily support the podcast. So I was walking in the mall a few weeks ago and I saw a friend of mine and he commented that he keeps listening to the podcast. And I was like, oh, great, bye, thanks. I'm glad, I'm glad you like it and everything. And he just told me, offhand to all right, but I hope you keep it going. And then I said, I'll try. And he seemed surprised by my response. He's like, why try? And then the truth is, doing the podcast takes a lot of time and effort on my end. Now, don't get me wrong. I love doing it. I learned so much from doing the podcast, especially talking to the guests. But listener support would be greatly appreciated. So if you genuinely learn something from the podcast, consider supporting us on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/032. That's 032 in letters. Also, I'll put a link in the show notes. Yeah, that helps a lot. All right, let's get to the show. Welcome to 032 Conversations, the podcast where we talk to creatives, see how they live, and how they do their work. I'm your host, Carlo Villarica. Hey. I noticed more and more. I don't know if I'm not sure if it's because I'm in the podcast realm, but I do notice there's a lot of new podcasts, particularly Cebu podcasts popping up. So more and more people in Cebu are starting to do podcasts. I'm super excited about it because, the more podcasts we have, the better we are for it. In fact, even if no one listens, it's a good idea to do a podcast. It's a good excuse to have a person turn off their phone, put it down, and give you their full attention. Yeah, it's good. It's good for conversations. I love doing it. And if you are ever interested in starting a podcast and don't know where to start, feel free to email me your questions. I would be happy to help. You can email info@032.com. That's 032 in letters. Or, maybe even just post your question on any of our social media. Just tag us at 032 Cebu or on Facebook or whatever. You'll find us. But yeah, you can post the question there and I would be happy to help out. I just noticed a lot more podcasts coming up. So I listened to this recent this new podcast called Cebu Music Stories, and it's a podcast hosted by the guy from Forgetful Bob. His name is Dominic John Dos Dos. I've never met him actually, but seems like an interesting person. And the nice thing about him is he seems to genuinely enjoy and support the local Cebu music scene. So he's been getting guests from the scene. I hope he keeps it up because I'm enjoying it. I might send him a message soon for an interview. Plus, Forgetful Bob. Good music. Love it. Oh, and another thing I wanted to talk about. Now, I don't plug this often, but I don't know. Maybe I should. I have a newsletter. If you like reading and if you haven't had enough of me talking or you don't like my voice because it's a bit annoying. Anyway, I have a newsletter called Monday Musings. It's a weekly newsletter that comes out every Monday of ideas worth sharing. So I found this to be a good avenue to share informative articles, videos, thoughts, or stuff without the noise of typical social media. And I just do it via newsletter. And if you'd like to receive a weekly newsletter, subscribe to it. You can head over to 032.com/Monday. So it basically comes out every Monday. People who read it seem to enjoy it. And occasionally I'll get an email response about whatever it is I wrote that day. And basically, here's the format of that email. In the beginning, it's something that I wrote, some thoughts that I had, and then the next 1, 2, or 3 things is either a video that I found interesting or an article that I thought was worth sharing, or basically anything. Sometimes I might review a product that I've been using. Yeah, 032.com/Monday. Okay, let's talk about Dennis Sio Montera. He is the person I interviewed in this podcast episode. So I like to keep tabs of the artists who do a show in Cube Gallery. It's a good avenue for me to meet artists and ultimately interview them on the podcast. So I know a lot of people from the music community, but not so much from the art community. And ever since I started interviewing artists, it's been eye-opening, to say the least. It's one of the things that I enjoy doing, and one of the things that it's a bit scary for me because these are people that I generally have never met before interviewing them. So it's really good. I mean, it's good for me because, I'm doing something that scares me. But in this episode, we talked to Dennis Montera, more popularly known as Sio. He's an artist, educator, and a cultural worker. He teaches art in UP Cebu Lahog. He also has a show currently in Cube Gallery called Finding the Calm in the Chaos. I think the show is going to be up till end of Feb or even till mid or end of March. So check it out. But before we get to that interview with Sio Montera, if this is your first time to listen to 032 Conversations, please subscribe. We have a new episode every Tuesday. All right, let's get to that interview. Cultural worker.
That's right.
What does that mean, cultural worker?
You do different kinds of work that is related to art and culture. And these can take in the form of research for one, and then also event organizing. And I also do policy making for arts grants, and basically also mapping the creative industries, especially in my field, the visual arts, mapping the artists in the country and more specifically in the regions.
So like putting when you say mapping, just listing down people and the kind of art that they do?
For one, identifying.
Okay.
Yeah, you identify if they are artists and if they have works to show it, and then document them officially.
Oh, okay. Do you do that under some sort of organization or?
That's right. We do it through the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, of which I am the vice head currently for the Committee on Visual Arts. So this is an elected position that hopes to spread art appreciation all over the country, as well as make policies for grants that artists can avail.
Okay, so you're really into this
I
community,
am.
di ba? Like we just spoke off mic nga, you know, uh, a lot of your students I've actually interviewed, right? Uh, how did you first get into art, di?
Oh, how I first got into art. Long story short, my mother, when I was still in second grade, saw the potential of me constantly drawing, and perhaps she saw that I was drawing on a different level than any other kid. Because of that, she asked the services of an artist that was doing like home tutorials to teach children, and it was then that I had this art shooter that would come into our house every Saturday for a period of 6 years. So that was when I really developed my seriousness for art. So back when I was still in elementary, I already knew that I wanted to take up fine arts
Mm.
whenever I reached my college
You
years.
remember the art instructor's name?
Of course, his name is none other than Mariano Mar Vidal.
Mar Vidal. You know,
Exactly.
he was my art, and he taught me at home too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I did not show the same aptitude as you probably. No, but you know, he used to go to my house, and then he teach me art also, and then I used to like to draw, and then I remember, you know, like at first he would teach me like, you know, draw a still life, but is that what they call that? Still life, like fruits and stuff. And then all I wanted to draw was like Dragon Ball cartoons. So he taught me how to draw Dragon Ball cartoons. So he taught you also.
Definitely. He was the one who was very instrumental in teaching me the basics. So, realism for that matter, you know, how to draw realistically, and shading and shapes until we got into landscape, seascape, and portraiture. So, he was my foundation.
Ah, yeah, Mar Vidal.
Yeah. But it was not just for a brief period of time. It like all my elementary years and up to the middle part of high school. So he was like there every weekend. So we developed a friendship, as well as like Mar also developed a deep connection with my family. My mother became their OB-GYN for her wife, and so on and so forth.
Is he still around? Is he still here in
Yes, he's
Cebu?
still around. Yes, he's still
Oh.
around. It's doing commissions mostly for portraiture.
You know, man, I can't. I should look him up because I don't even think. I'm not sure I can remember what he looks like. I was really young, like maybe.
He was this balding guy who wears
I know he was bald.
who wears like a Steven Seagal cap
Uh-huh.
with a ponytail.
I should look him up. Okay, so that one. So early on, you were into art na gyud, no?
Yeah.
And then, but a lot of people, like me ba, like I was into art, but it never, blossomed into anything. Like I would draw and everything, but somewhere along the way, you just kept going, no?
Um, I disagree with that
Okay.
because if you were taught drawing somehow, perhaps you did not really continue along that path of drawing on paper or painting for that matter, but it was your creativity that was being harnessed at that time.
That's true, yeah.
So, in a sense, you ventured into the world of music. And for me, that is still very much related.
That's right.
So your appreciation for beauty, pattern, sound is the same appreciation that we have visual artists in looking at things, colors. It's the same. Creativity within an individual is innate. It is abstract. So whatever the field, as long as you're creative, you're an artist.
Oh yeah. Well, that's true. I believe that. I believe that. Yeah, you're right. Because even when you mentioned, in fact, when you were mentioning that, like somebody taught you when you were a kid, then right away I was like, wait, yeah, somebody taught me when I was a kid too, and to be honest, that had a huge impact. I still think about it every now and then. No, it's just not. It's just a different medium now. Like I ended up being creative in a different way, I guess. No, you mentioned you mentioned already that you taught. What did you teach exactly?
Right now.
You're still teaching, yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm teaching fine arts in the studio arts program. Um, Currently, I handle art history. I do lectures in art history. I also handle techniques in painting, as well as I'm the one in charge for doing visual arts research through a thesis. So it's a combined, like trying to teach students how to paint, as well as trying to teach students how to understand the theoretical aspect of the visual arts.
So in this is in San Carlos,
This is in UP.
UP,
Yeah.
in UP. Ah, okay. So there are a lot of like really well, I that a lot of really good artists who came from UP. No, the and then but you also mentioned that but you weren't teaching there like only recently you started teaching again.
Well, to be honest, this is my 20th year being a faculty in UP. I was just away for 5 years to finish my PhD. But
Mm.
I first taught at UP in 1996 as a part-time lecturer. And in 1999, I was absorbed into being a full-time faculty. And from there, I was able to get my master's from UP Diliman and also my PhD. And now I'm celebrating 20 years.
Wow, 20
Yeah.
years as a teacher. Have you noticed anything like in terms of the students from 20 years ago to now? Like what is there anything that's different?
Good question. I don't really want to compare
Uh-huh.
because it's every generation has their own, let's say, feel towards their individual expressions. In terms of major differences, um, my students today are more lucky in terms of how technology has evolved in guiding them towards having a more profound career in the visual arts. And what I'm trying to say is that knowledge out there through the internet is just one click away compared to my former students 20 years ago when they still had to go to the library just to seek out information. So times have changed. In terms of creativity, I wouldn't say that one generation was better than the others. Um, it was always their works were always placed based on the context of their time and the experiences they had, particularly here in Cebu. So each generation of my students were individually unique
Mm-hmm.
in their own way.
Well, yeah, you just reminded me of like in music, ba. So right now with the internet, kinda like if you wanted to learn a song, you just go to YouTube,
Correct.
search the song, and then chords or tabs, and then somebody will be there teaching you of varying degrees of proficiency. No, the
Sure.
person teaching you might not actually be teaching you the correct thing,
Correct.
but there's something there. back then, at least when I was learning the guitar, it was like we had a cassette tape, put it in there, and then you press play. You listen to the note, and then you press stop, and you try to play it in the guitar, and then you rewind, and then you press play again, and then just did that for like hours. No, so now you see all these, like, at least in terms of musicians, you see these kids who can do ridiculous things on a guitar or on a drum or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean, uh, you know, like creative, like kanang, like in the guitar, like if you can do scales really fast, like that kind of sound. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's gonna move you or move another person or another listener. I suppose it's similar with
The visual arts.
the visual arts.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Right now, as you said, one can just go to YouTube. They want to learn portraiture. There's a lot of video instructions. Some of them are in time lapse and how to like put on the colors so that
Hmm.
eventually, in a matter of 30 minutes or to an hour, you can actually compose a portrait in oil paint or acrylic paint using a canvas. So before, students had to look at their teacher or the master and then observe. And sometimes it takes some time because some teachers are very good in explanation while some aren't. They just like paint. This was like the atelier style. And
What do you mean atelier style?
it's like, you observe the master and you try to follow
Okay.
him as best as you could. And without the master talking. So, it's just like mimicking your teacher. And this was for a long time the way art was taught. Okay? It's like teaching someone how to ride a bike. You don't like, okay, step number one, you don't like go sit down there and balance. You don't do that. You just like try to guide someone how to balance the bike until they get the hang of it. So it's the same for visual arts. You just have to try, put paint on your brush, and do not be afraid to stick it on the canvas. And then once you get all the colors and lines and shape together, it will form into something based on your what you're trying to copy. So right now, that can be easily done by YouTube tutorials.
Yeah.
And it's such a shame that it was not there 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, I can
Like,
imagine.
we could have saved a lot of time. Right now, the kids are very lucky and they have this. So it can fast track their learning
Mm.
because they can go to YouTube and more or less have that skill already when they go to class. And that is good for us teachers because we can give them like um, more complex problems to solve in what they're supposed to do in painting. So
When you say complex problems in painting, can you give me an example? Like, what is that? What does that mean?
well, it depends. You have to analyze the different formal elements that comprise a composition, like lighting. Okay, the amount of light and the amount of shadows, and also how a portrait is, for example, positioned. So if you give them a problem on a three-quarters pose, just like in photography, how would you capture that with a hand pointing at you? And that is called foreshortening. So these are different ways for an artist to, practice and develop his skill through these different elements that I am talking about. So aside from the things I have said, there are so many other elements that are needed in terms of visual organization. It's just like in music, how you combine all these notes together. There
Yeah.
are certain theoretical principles in there that we teach our students before we actually advance them to a higher course. And it's like first year, second year, third year level of maturity. And so that when they go to their first fourth year as a fine arts student in college, they already understand all these things. And it's time for them to be original. That's why they come up with their own style, their own art that will somehow contribute to the knowledge of visual art practice.
Yeah, I think so. Considering in the age now where it's so easy to learn all of these, like, I mean, not easy is the hard is not probably the term. All the information is available, right? To learn all of these skills. I feel like that part when you said whether they're fifth year or fourth year student, where they have to come up with something original. In a way, to me, that's like they have to come up with something to say, something that is theirs. No, I feel like that's the hard part, especially today, because that's. I mean, going back to like the parallels of music, I always wonder what it must be like to be a teenage kid now if you're into music, because back when I was younger, your classmates listened to maybe 10 bands. And then if there was a certain genre, there was a, like, let's say grunge or whatever, there were like 10 bands that you were into. So you kind of knew more or less, okay, that's what was good. Now it's, you can be into anything. If you were into a certain genre, there's 1,000 bands to choose from. And it's, in a way, because of that multitude of like sounds or choice, basically, that's where it's difficult not to find a more, oh, how is this my thing? No?
Um, Totally agree with that again. I remember a student asking me, what makes a student like her different who is taking up fine arts in university to other students who are doing self-learning, being a self-taught artist. And the example came out like, they can just look at YouTube and all. And I told them, well, that is basically it. They're just looking at YouTube and copying.
Hmm.
They're not original. And the difference between the university student now, well, for that matter, in UP Cebu Fine Arts, is that we do train them in the fundamentals. But after we feel that they are already equipped with the necessary skills, we now teach them the other side of art, which is self-expression. And separating yourself from the multitude of art that is found in the internet and even in the community here, that you see your friends doing some art. How do you separate your creativity, your output, with the rest of the group, with the rest of your friends, with the rest of Cebu artists? And as you said, that is the hard part.
Yeah,
So there is no formula to answer that question. Each artist must find his or her own way. Some do contemplation, some do research, some do like have an epiphany, like an aha moment, like, oh, here it is. Some find it by accident, like, oh, I splash paint on the canvas and, oh, there it is. That is what I want to do. Some look for found objects. Some use their identity, like being a member of an LGBT group would drive them. Some use their commentary on social, political issues, and that drives them. And they use that as catalysts for their art making. So to each his own, but finding it, it's really hard. You really have to do deep introspection. And in the fine arts thesis class, um, we guide them on that direction, because the thesis must be original, and it must be supported by a very sound theoretical framework. Not to mention describing your physical process of creating the work. So you're not only an artist, you're also a researcher, and eventually, once you submit your thesis, you become a scholar. So it's the best of both worlds, but it's not for everybody.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Oh, well, like everything. So like kanang for example, lang like people taking up nursing. Sometimes they take up nursing, and then they don't always end up being a nurse. And I'm sure it's the same thing. You have people who take up art, and then they might end up in, I don't know, marketing or something. A lot of people end up in marketing. No. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I thought this would be really interesting was because I like to keep tabs on Cube, because like as I mentioned, that's not my world, no. So the artists that they are looking at, that they have, I always take a peek, because I always want to see like what would be a if somebody would be a good or interesting interview, but also for me. And then so it allows me to interview all of these artists, and then when they told me that you were putting up work there, so I looked it up. It's like, oh, okay, it's gonna would it be considered abstract? What do you call your work? Abstract,
Non-figurative art.
non-figurative art.
Yeah.
Okay, is that like is that under the umbrella of abstract?
It's like abstract art is non-figurative art. Non-figurative art is more like a scientific uh, name on what kind of art we are doing. Abstract art is a term that was derived from the abstract expressionist movement. I'm sure you've heard of the Jackson Pollocks
Mm.
and some other artists that are quite famous for their abstract art. And these are all the same: non-objective, non-figurative, abstract art. But abstract art is the most common.
Okay, so when and then they also told me that you're a teacher, so I was wondering if you could help explain it to me, because I don't particularly understand the that form of art ba. Okay, so for example, a lot of the artists that I have here, there are characters, there's kanang it could also be my generation. I just mentioned, like, I grew up wanting to draw Dragon Ball. No, it could also be that. So I'm kind of curious if you could talk about that form of art a little bit, because it's I just don't understand it. No, I'm one of those people who kanang, all right, I just don't get it. Like I look at it and I have a hard time grasping. No, I don't know if that's you know if that's what it's supposed to mean. If that's the intention, I don't know. Could you help me out a little bit?
I will try. um, since the beginning of time, and let me just have a little art history
Sure.
lesson here. Since the beginning of time, man and woman, for that matter, are always trying to depict images, okay, that were recognizable. Throughout the story of art, people, artists for that matter, depicted images and created structures as well as sculptures, okay, to portray or express something that was important during their time. Okay, it was not always a product that was going to be placed in a museum or a gallery for that matter. So, if you take a look at the timeline on the history of art, okay, most of the images that you see are pretty much recognizable objects in daily life.
Uh huh.
Okay, whether it's a man, woman, animal, and for buildings, well, its functionality, um, and the pyramids, for example, were places of burial. So all of this had specific reasons why they were designed as such. Abstract art uh, is also in that similar vein, but this is already in the modern world, wherein artists started to rebel against tradition, against depicting imagery, okay, recognizable images
Uh huh. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
their work. So, because art is constantly evolving, as I have mentioned earlier, art nowadays seems to be like designed for a gallery exhibit or a museum show. The artists at that time, as early as the Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky in the late 1890s, and then of course the abstract expressionists in the 1950s in New York. Okay, they were all figurative artists in
When you say figurative,
recognizable
okay.
figures.
Yeah. Okay. There.
They paint objects, people, uh,
Understand.
images that can be understood, and let's just say uh, have a certain degree of form.
Okay. Or recognizability, I guess.
Yes, yeah, and so because that an artist is so, let's just say, rebellious, they just wanted to do something that is just flat on the canvas without form. And because it is unrecognizable, it was called abstract. Just like feeling or, the experience of love, hatred, anger, or peace. These are abstract concepts that are, let's just say, best left to the imagination. So when you say that you are there having a hard time grasping, uh, that is normal. But the real reason for art, abstract art, is really about just the expression of something deeper. That is why abstract artists, the more professional abstract artists, know what they're doing, and they have a very strict method on how to arrive uh, at their process. Okay, in my case, my forms are unpremeditated. That means I don't have any idea what will come out. So each painting is more like a discovery, and then once my heart and mind would tell me that that is a finished work, then I would stop. If not, I continue my strict process of doing the work, whether it takes me 10 layers or 20 layers until I get satisfied. So you can call it therapy as well. And but in the end, you like the result of what you did. Okay? And let me just jump to a possible question, which is like, how do you put meaning in the work? That is very difficult. Because when in the act of painting, you have all this feeling inside of you that can be part of a bigger sequence of emotions that is happening in your life, but you don't really mind it because you get lost in the painting. So once you're lost in the painting, just like music, once you're like jamming, you forget everything. But that is how the moment that you stop, you'd realize, wow, I did that. Why? Perhaps you were like brokenhearted, or like you just won the lotto and you play all this music according to how you were feeling that day, or it just comes out. It's like the guitar can be an extension of your hands, and so is the brush. And then you do movement with your body, and you try to create harmony. You try to create something that would release all this tension or inspiration inside of you. So that expression is the same for creating abstract art. It's like a widow in music. You're just like creating out of nothing until
You're what's the there's a term here where you just play. You're improvising.
improvising.
In music,
True.
it's yeah. When you said music, the first thing that came to my mind was so we had a band, and then in the band, the songs were very thought out. Actually,
Yeah.
the songwriter McCoy, he really spent hours just writing the songs, right? But everybody else really didn't do much in terms of the songwriting. But one of my favorite things that we used to do is we'd all get into a room and somebody would play a riff, a part, whatever, a drum part or a bass part or a guitar part, and then everybody would pile in and just play. And sometimes this would go on for 5 or 10 minutes, where we would just, there was no thought into it. No one was even talking. It was just you just try to get into this flow state where you're just playing notes and improvising and bouncing off each other and everything. And I wonder if to some degree that is what's happening when a painter is painting abstract art, but just but they're not in a group or anything, but they're by themselves, so they're just letting it
So
flow. No, so yeah. So do you agree with that? Is that something?
very much, very much. You must have that flow. Otherwise, your work will not have the harmony that can be recognized by other listeners, or in our case, viewers. So if someone does not relate to your painting, well, perhaps they don't find any connection. Okay. But I have to say that each artist has their own method. Some abstract artists do not improvise because they have like calculated moves on how to arrive at their kind of abstraction. So it's different case to case for abstract artists, and it is the same for realist artists. Okay, and even for the figurative artists. For most of my students that you have interviewed, okay, they have their own methods of production, and there is no like a general theme. How do they do their art? They have to base it on their own personal system from beginning to end. And in abstract art, it's the same, except that the only difference is that we're not copying figures. We're relying on an emotion, or even we're relying on an inspiration from seeing the sunset, for example. Okay, it was a moment that you saw that you wanted to express on a deeper level. Why? I always like love sunsets. Like, it captures me. And more than that, it also gives me a deeper understanding of how history has uh, depicted the sunset in different forms, from photography to dance to music to painting, and I'm just glad to be part of that. So uh, any any inspiration that can come into your mind would be very important to us. That is why we also do not paint like every day,
Mm.
because that inspiration sometimes is so hard. We've heard of writer's block,
Yeah.
and sometimes I don't know, in music, what do you call that? You're like, you really don't want to play, for this stretch of time,
Uh huh. You're just tired.
things like that. And for artists also, getting inspired to just go in the studio and face your canvas. Sometimes I spend like a day or two just staring at my canvas, talking to my canvas, and nothing really comes out. Okay, even if I put a splash of paint just to improvise, my mood just isn't there, and I just have to step back. It's like the painting is not ready for me yet, and I'm not ready for the painting yet.
So
So
you don't force it.
definitely
Yeah.
not.
I feel like some people would force it. Like, well, at least for writing. So let's say writing, right? So for writing, there's a writing is one of those things that. Okay, wait. I will start this with say obviously there's no right or wrong way to do it, but a lot of writers say that one of their secrets is they just write every day. Most of what they write is shit, no, but then the process of writing every day is like a way for them to get into a flow. So maybe the first 30 minutes or first hour of writing, nothing, they get nothing out of it, but maybe in the last 5 or 10 there's something there, and that's what in the end that's what they use, right? So maybe in a day, maybe they wrote 1,000 words, but they'll only use 30 of it, no, for example, right? So that's for writing. Now I'm sure everybody has a different way of doing things, but you also mentioned flow, and flow has come up in the podcast quite a bit, because I think that's also really important in terms of like creative work, no? Uh, do you have a way, so like in those instances where you're staring at a canvas and then you're not feeling it, no? So you don't force it. So you stop. Okay, you're nodding your head. Yes, you stop. No, is there a way for you? Do you have a way that you personally get back into flow, into that state of flow, or do you just show up again the next day and see again? Because not painting is also a form of painting, diba?
Mm.
Kanang not forcing it is you could, but as long as you sit in front of your canvas for an hour or 2 hours, whatever, and then if nothing comes out, you can still say, okay, that was a work day. That was day one, and then day two, you know. So not working, not putting it into canvas is also a way of painting. But is there a way for you to get into that flow? Do you have like a method, or you mentioned writer's block? Is there a way for you to? Have you ever?
Well, yeah, I get your question. A method, I call it a system.
Okay.
Once you develop your own system, um, you try to do it every day. Um, like in my case, I always tell my students, the first thing that I do is just sit in my studio. And then there, I put on my apron, my painter's apron, and I drink coffee. And from there, I don't paint. I just sit.
Uh huh.
Look at the studio, and if I want to clean up, then I clean up. I just um, trying to get a feel of everything. And I look at my material supply, if it's still there, and if I need to order some more, things like that. I just want to be ready when that moment arrives, so that everything is ready, and I just go with the moment. So, um, yes, I do have this method. And it includes different things. Aside from drinking coffee, I also like go to my studio and watch Netflix. And if there's really nothing good that I don't feel like finishing the movie or documentary that I'm watching, then I go to my painting. So for me, it's just like a very normal thing to do the things that I do in my studio because I do it every time. And because I do it every time, I know that this urge to paint will just come out. Okay? Whether it's like uh, early in the morning, after lunch, or late in the afternoon, I don't care. As long as I'm there doing the things that I just do in my studio. Okay? So it's like, I don't know, in basketball, they call it a warm up.
Yeah.
But I don't, there's no time limit, okay, in that warm up. And I had to go back to what you were saying about the writers. They just write every day. And I believe that's true. Also, another factor that contributes to all of this is if you have a deadline.
Oh, yeah, that one
Yeah,
helps.
if you have a deadline, and then that will also go into your head. That will add pressure that, must at least do something. But now that I've understood already how my creative juices come out, so I put the deadline way far ahead. Like if I'm doing a show, let's just say in the next 6 months, I'm already finishing my collection by now. So like I do it way ahead. So I will not be pressured by the deadline.
So you have your own. You still have a deadline, but it's a deadline that you set. It's not the real deadline.
Yes.
It's like this is the deadline that you set for yourself.
Correct.
So it still works.
It still works, yeah. But some of the artists that I've known, they have a deadline because like they need to finish it for the sake of exhibiting it and making sure that they get some money out of it. So when that creeps into my head, I always say, okay, stop. This means that I'm doing my work for somebody else now. And that's foul for me. And it's so sad to see many artists do that because, well, money is important. You cannot just leave it on the side because you need to buy your materials.
Well, you need to buy food,
Exactly.
shelter,
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
everything.
But the quality of art suffers. And a lot of artists do not know that. Okay? And their content creation, as you call it, becomes so weak. Especially the recognizable images. Okay?
What do you mean? What do you mean recognized?
Paintings that are recognizable.
Okay.
Figurative
The
works.
figurative,
Yeah.
okay.
Works with recognizable images, and you see them in an exhibition, and it's like, maybe this needs a little more work. And,
So you can feel like if it's rushed, if it's
shallow.
Oh, yeah.
Because the meaning of the work, which is the symbolic aspect of the value, the real value of the work is the symbolic aspect. It either traces back to you on a personal level, or it can be your message to society or to a particular problem or to your family. And it becomes more personal, and that symbolism that you put in your work is your thumbprint. Why that artwork is important and why that artwork is good enough to be,
out in the world.
to be receiving an award perhaps, or to be at the level where your status is. So if you're an artist that just do works like a factory, then your reputation will be more like, he's just a factory artist. So making works, a lot of them all, and selling them at very reasonable prices because they need the money. And there is nothing wrong with that. Except that if you want to transcend yourself, to be in a level where your works become more symbolic, in music, they will become like iconic. then you know, it has to be deeper. Your process has to be deeper. Your commitment to your craft has to be at an all-time high. And I was just watching Queen, the movie, and
Uh-huh.
then I've seen them like, wow, they're like really raising the bar, and you get inspired.
Oh yeah, that was a
Exactly.
really good movie.
Exactly.
But that also begs the question, though, that so let's say you're a new artist, and then you want this to be your thing. You want to be a full time artist. You want to make a living this way, right? And so how do you? Because there is a certain point when, like, way in the future where you're comfortable, and then you can uh, you've done all that work in the past that you can now afford to be much more precise with your art, with your output. But in the beginning, so in the beginning it's different. So how do you get from uh, I want to do this as a way of to make a living, and then how do you get from there to the point where
You are.
where you have a name for yourself, where you can price your art at at the price that you feel like it is worth doing. You're not just pricing it to buy art materials. You're pricing it as this is what it's worth. Kanang,
Yeah.
'di ba? So how do you get from point A to B?
Um, that's a very difficult question because, as I mentioned earlier, there is no specific formula on getting there, making it, so to speak. For young artists, it is very hard to balance um, creating art and supporting the daily needs for life. And that is why most artists would describe themselves as somewhat struggling, not really to that point of the complete struggle, but struggling in a sense that they want to do something that is more deeper, but their market would prefer something more affordable, and they have to do that kind of art to sustain themselves. Your question is how do they go to the next level?
How do they transition? Yeah, because like
Transition, yeah.
there was I'm gonna get the story wrong. There was this artist. What do you know that? Do you know that artist who famously got like shares on Facebook because he did the Facebook mural? There was this guy who was selling works on the street like really cheap and everything, and then could barely make it through. I'm probably getting the story wrong. He could barely make it through, and then so he's like whatever. I'm just gonna do this, and then somehow along the way, I think Facebook got him to do art. So he did it, and then he just became like they like Facebook asked him to do art, and Facebook didn't have money at that point, so just gave him some shares to Facebook, and then I might be wrong honestly, but then he became really rich. So he all of a sudden didn't need the money anymore. So he was selling the same art at a much higher price, and then people were buying it na noon. No? So, I mean, yeah, in a way, that story is just showing you that there's really no. Like, that story is the exception, probably, to what most people go through.
Yes.
No? And there's really no steps
Or formula for that
or
matter.
formula, yeah. No?
And I believe that artists, as long as you do put in the time to get better. When I did my research for my PhD dissertation, I interviewed the top artists from two countries, Taiwan and also in the Philippines.
Uh-huh.
one common finding that I had between all of them was that they were workhorses in the studio. Not even to the level that I am working in the studio. They were like 10 hours or more every day in the studio, just working their asses off. And they didn't care about what society was doing. They were just in the studio doing their stuff. And when they came out, it was like, wow, magical. It was not just the typical like 10, 15 works for an exhibit, but their output was like, can fit a museum. So
Mm.
they really put in the time, and this is mentioned by one of the artists, the Chinese artist from Taiwan. He said, like, if you get like 10,000 hours doing the same stuff, you'll get better at it. You become good at it, actually. So whatever it is, like playing a guitar, the piano, or making a drawing, if you just keep on practicing it, repeating it, and he said like 10,000 hours. Okay, you do the math and how long it will take you to master one stuff. You will eventually become good at it. Now the question of bringing your reputation up along the way is a different
Mm.
conversation altogether, because this is where branding and marketing would come in, and artists are currently doing well. The younger artists are currently doing their branding and marketing through social media. Unlike Western traditions, most artists have agents, so to speak. In our country, and our artists here, especially in Cebu, are like their own managers. Okay, they would be the ones doing the carpentry. They'll be the ones painting it. Some of them do their own framing, and then they find ways and means to have an exhibition, whether it's in Ayala or in Cube Gallery or 856. Um, it depends. They look for ways, and one of the driving forces is that to increase reputation. But if you look at it, most artists, because of the need for survival, are often trapped in that uh, operation, because money, the need for money would come in as something bigger, a motivator.
Mm.
And it's sad because the way I see it, and this is through my research, we don't have the necessary structures here compared to Western countries, or the bigger Asian countries like Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, and Japan. They have structures that will guide artists after they graduate, and then slowly bring up their name and reputation to be recognized. Here, well, I've seen a lot of my students just become call center agents. Okay, and a lot of them have stopped painting. They went into web design, because there was no market for their artwork,
Mm.
and then the pressure of being a graduate from university and not working um, falls badly on your parents, that will like keep on nagging you. What?
Oh, I'm
When are
sure.
you going to apply for work? See, they don't understand that being an artist is like already working on a daily basis, but it they want to see something commodified.
Yeah, when I talk to a lot of the local artists here in Cebu, and then uh, almost every time, probably the younger ones, that I always ask, so how? Yeah, I ask this question in different ways, though, but the gist is, so how did you convince your parents in a way to to leave you alone, basically. Now that you are an artist, and then I mean, of course, you get different answers. Some people rebelled. You know, some people were lucky. Right away, they were able to sell something, and then they can show their parents, "Oh, I was able to earn doing this." So then, then that little win was enough to just keep the ball rolling in a way. No. So I have versions of I've heard versions of that. Um,
You should write a book.
well, I don't know. We'll see.
How to convince a parent how to become an artist.
Yeah, no, because that's a real thing. Because I always say this example, like I have great parents, but it was always like when we would play music in my band, and the truth was we never thought it was gonna be anything. It was just for fun. Like it was a fun way to hang out with my best friends. And then so my mom would ask me, "Oh, where are you guys going? Oh, we have a gig later." Oh yeah, Byron mo ana. And then my joke to her was, I mean, always, yeah, they pay us, oy, pizza and beer. And but you know, there's versions of that. Everybody, I mean, here in the Philippines especially, there's a lot of versions of that. Parents doing that, and then mine is very tame in particular. There are versions of like parents going, "Hey, you can't do that. You should stop wasting your time." Like really discouraging the noon ba. And you know, that's not what you want to do. Like I may have not earned money from it, but wow, like I got so much out of it in that sense. Uh,
True.
no? Yeah, but it's not really a question, more of a commentary on that.
Yeah, if I may add, the the hard the hard part now is after the artists have convinced their parents, so that now they're on their own, living as like full time artists, and that kinds of has a very cool connotation, but it's actually very hard um, thing to do. Being full time and all, you don't really know where to get the next paycheck. Um, the hardest part of this next step is convincing yourself where you will be in the next 10 years, because well, for unsolicited advice to my former students who are now um, at a level in their career. Let's just say they are now mid-career artists. They're now exhibiting. They're now being invited by different galleries here and also in Manila. Um, is to make sure, and I make sure that they transcend their art making to a level that will get them to that 10-year itch. Um, I'm sure you have heard of artists telling you that, art is not a sprint, it's like a marathon.
Okay.
Some of them are really doing good right now, but the question they need to answer at this very moment in their career is like, where will they be in the next 5, 10 years? If they are still there, then that will speak volumes of how they prepared and planned for their career. It's good to see that they're having success now, but as they say, the art career is not a sprint; it's a marathon. Look at Van Gogh, for example. He never had the opportunity to be recognized by um, institutions during his time. It was only his brother who kept buying his works to make him sane. And then he had a best friend in Gauguin who was also like delusional in a way, and they were both fighting. And Van Gogh cut off his ear because of, a woman. And
Mm.
it's all other factors that combine to your creativity. There's this sense of uh, being unstable is always at the back of your head. But if you are smart enough to know that this is the kind of art you're making right now, that will be your goal in the next 10 years, that you will be able to transcend and be at the level of an artist once they reach their 40s, like where I am now, then they would be set, going towards that direction and not just um, relish the moment that they're having now, but also pace. The word is pacing for me, and pace their career, that just like a marathon, you sometimes need to step back or slow down a little bit to gain for the last 2 miles. And it's something that is not being taught. And most of the time, artists have to learn it the hard way, because there will always be a purgatory period that you get stuck. Like, okay, there's a new generation now. They have this new kind of music, and then I'm still doing ballads, for that matter, of the older generation. So, uh, where will I go? Do I join them, or do I continue to be unique? So there are so many questions that you need to answer, and once you know yourself better, then you can use that to plan a more strategic approach on how you will want to become in the next 10 years of your career.
Yeah, that's an important question. Like the looking forward, the look like 10 years from now, like I've started thinking about that, like for me, just myself, and there are certain decisions you'd go like, oh, okay, I think like there are certain things that we're doing, like, okay, the money's good now, but I don't know if this is gonna continue, you know. So there were certain decisions that I like, for example, that I've made. I'm like, okay, I think I need to start investing on this other thing, even though it's like, well, for me, like for example, like this podcast is an example of that. Like, number one, like this does not earn that much, but I get so much out of it personally, because I get to talk to people, I get to meet people, but also this, for me, this will be much more valuable 10 years from now, 5 to 10 years from now, no? So I don't know. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I keep doing it, because it's I mean, it also helps that talking to interesting people is fun. No?
Let me add to that. I agree completely. I mean, I'm very happy you said that, because what you're doing will become a cultural treasure in the years to come for the next generation. As long as our government leaders get their shit together and recognize how important art, the artists, and our culture is to this city and to this province, then we will have all this material of all our talented individuals, our creatives, and what they have done. And in order for the next generation to study these creative people, they will look at your podcast, listen to your podcast, and once those are in the archives of our museums and whatever the government plans to do with all these material, it's something that is cannot be taken away anymore. And instead of, what are they doing now? Like everything is like infrastructure, but this one, they don't value it.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now, that it has no value to them. But for the next generation, you will see, like, your platform will be studied by communication students and will be studied by art historians, because you've interviewed a lot of the creative people, and those were the movers of our creativity. And one day, it's my dream that Cebu, we are now a creative city, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and one day, in that direction, all the structures for creativity and recognizing our talents will be there. And definitely, these recordings play an important part.
Yeah, well, yeah. Like, I realized that, like, well, I don't know. It's very like when you said like recording in museum. I was like, wow, I've never even thought of
It is, yeah.
that. No? But I remember talking to to a guest, and she was one of the. She used to organize all of these gigs, and then she was one of those. Her name's Shak Mangkao, Ate Shak, and then she organized hundreds of gigs, and then she told me, yun nga, she realized nga, in a way, when I was talking to her, this was a form of oral history. Because a lot of times we're just talking about, stories, ba? Like things that happened in the past. And yeah, when I was talking to her, I realized, oh, this is a way to literally record our history. Well, anyway, but we've been talking for a while. I wanted to make sure we mentioned your current exhibit in Cube Gallery. It's called Finding the Calm in the Chaos. Can you tell me about it?
Oh, great. Yeah. Before that, let me just invite everyone to catch my ongoing show at the Cube Gallery. It's Finding the Calm in the Chaos. As you've already heard in this podcast, it's like an exhibition of abstract works. For those of you who know me, this is my homecoming exhibit. Okay, after 5 years of studying abroad, I came back last year around later half of the year, and then these are the works that I were doing in my studio, and Cube called me that if I could have this exhibit, and then at that time I did not have any concept. In fact, I really did not have any concept on what to have as a theme for the upcoming show. So I told them, "Oh, let me just continue working." And when I did the first 15 works, and I started to study them, and I told myself, "Oh, these are all reactions to my adjustment period of living in Cebu again." Living in a country before this was very different. I mean, Taiwan is very efficient. It's very clean. There's no traffic, and going around was very easy. I just had a scooter, and there were motorcycle lanes. Okay, and then going to my university in Taiwan was like 5-10 minutes, and then the library there was like very equipped. Things like that, very small uh, daily experiences. And when I came back to Cebu, everything just turned upside
Oh,
down.
it's a shock.
Shock. Well, uh, um, it was a shock because I had to deal with it every day. Traffic, for one, was the most disturbing on my part, because when I 5 years ago, before I left, I our house is just in Gentle Breeze in Hernan Cortez,
Oh, okay.
and then when we go out, go to UP, it's like 10 minutes. Now it takes me an hour and a half, depending on the day and on the time. And when I come home after my class ends at 4:30, well, just took me 30 minutes before. Now it's like an hour and a half. Get home around 6:30. So instead of preparing for my lessons the following day, I get so stressed and tired, and like the following day, sometimes I just have to improvise on my class. So like I realized, no, I can't deal with this. So those were one of the few examples that I took inspiration from. Well, not really inspiration, like
Frustration.
frustration, frustration in how I did my paintings. So, but mind you, the works, when I finish them, the titles will just come arbitrarily.
I was gonna ask you about that
Yeah.
because your titles are very thought provoking. Like
Yeah.
I wanted to read three of them. So one is like trade your busy life for a full one. Another one is that you or is it your ego? And then this other one is rain slowly washes away the pain of yesterday. How did you come up with the titles? What do you mean by arbitrarily? Like kanang
Well, after the work is done, and then I would look at the painting, and then I would do an introspection of sorts on what this painting means to me from an aesthetic point of view as well as a uh, contextual point of view. So, from an aesthetic point, I would look at how the elements are arranged and how it would mirror certain scenarios that are current to me. So, again, for example, one is traffic or rain for that matter. Sometimes it it rains here in Cebu and floods would come in and things like that. In terms of contextual, its meaning. So how I relate it to some profound experiences that I have, like um, seeing some colleagues in the past after 5 years, and then when I come home, I don't recognize them. They're now like completely different monsters.
yeah.
So okay, that is not the person I used to know. So I have to decide if I still should maintain my closeness with him or her, or keep a distance. So these are the things that became part of my storytelling in my works. So arbitrary because I just attach the symbolic and the aesthetic description in the work. So what was the other title you were saying?
Trade your busy life for a full
Well,
one.
that's easy. It's like you know you get to work so hard, and then when you come home, you're so spent out, you don't have time for your kids anymore. So I told myself, like, okay, I don't want to be an administrator in university. Even though if I have a PhD, uh, if I become an administrator, I will lose that time to paint. So much more, I will lose that time to be with my kids. So, you have to make choices that will um, make you more human. And I chose the more humanistic aspect of my decisions to just be a regular faculty member and not become like a dean or chancellor or anybody important. Because what you'll do is you'll be looking at a building and making sure that all light bulbs are lighting up and making sure that all the students are not complaining and all that. I don't want to deal with
It's not a
that.
role that you wanted.
Exactly. I just want to be somebody doing what I love to do, and that is paint. Okay, and of course, I have other roles, being a son and being a father and all of that. And I want to maintain that because I've been away for a while. And right now, I'm trying to reestablish things. And that is perhaps the gist of my exhibition. It's like um, making sense of all the things going on around me and making sure that in the end, it is the things that I want to do and what I love to do. So finding the calm in the chaos.
Yeah, and then which one of the things that you love to do is to paint, and then that's the
True.
calm. Ah, yeah. And then I also noticed like you have a different. There was a video of you online, like you're making you're making this painting, and I assume it's kind of the same process where uh I'm making an assumption. You have like layers of paint, and then you scrape it. That's the was that the process that you were using for this exhibition?
I'm glad you asked. That was a process that I did when I was still overseas. One of the reasons I did that process because I did not have a proper studio in Taiwan. So we were living in a small room apartment on the ninth floor of a building. So it was so hard to get the room messy because an inspector would go in once they collect rent.
Okay.
So we had to clean up. So I just had to control everything that I can. Compared to my studio here in Cebu, I don't care if the paint splashes all over the walls, and that's part of the expression technique. I was more free, and also during that time when I was abroad, it was the more sensible thing to do because I was inspired from my surroundings of old temples and old Chinese shop houses. They were really old and the paints were peeling off. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. How can I replicate that in a painting? So I tried to study different approaches how to do that. And I found one that suits my work effectively. And then when I got back to Cebu, I went to my previous style, which was including a lot of texture and underneath the first layer. And then I incorporated the new style that I found in Taiwan or developed in Taiwan into what it is now. So more or less, it's like a marriage of two styles, the one before I left and the one while I was abroad. And now when I came back, I fused the two because I now had the privilege of doing it in the studio. So for me, it was also part of my evolution on how my work continually changes and in a way transcending myself, not just getting stuck with what I did in the past.
Yeah, but I was gonna say like the works reminded me a lot of kind of when you said wall. Actually, that's what it reminds me of, like architectural texture, basically, no. And when I saw that video, yeah, of you the one like the I guess it's scraping. It's the scraping. It's like okay, so that's how he did it. Like in a way, it's like pulling the curtain. But like okay, so that's really something. And then so you for this one you did like your old style and you incorporated the new. I'd be interested to look at it again to see the 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 splashy the what did you say, the splashing of paint underneath.
Well, in artistry, it's called gestural
Gestural.
splashing. You can call it as such as well. But these gestural movements in abstract painting was famously done by Jackson Pollock when he did drippings of paint. Yeah, those are gesture paintings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you so much. We've been talking for a while. No, do you want to add anything? Is there anything you want to add? Anything I might have missed?
Nothing. Just continue being creative. Just I guess if there's one thing I have to say before I go, it's like once you feel that urge to do something out of the ordinary, whether it's like doing a Dragon Ball drawing on that wall, the back of you, I would go for it. I mean, yeah, don't let anybody stop you.
Okay, where can people find you online?
Well, I have my website. It's siomontera.com. I also have my Instagram, Facebook, and these are all marketing tools. But if they do need to speak to me, I'm in the College of Communication, Art and Design at UP Cebu in Lahug.
All right. I'll put all that in the show notes. Thank you guys, Shoha.
You're welcome.
All right.
Okay, I was happy to connect with Sio Montera. It's always tricky talking to people that I just met because I don't know their rhythm yet. I don't know if they are talkative or quiet or responsive. I don't know. you get what I'm saying. Like whenever you talk to somebody new, it's always tricky. And then my first goal as an interviewer is to get the guest as relaxed as possible. Fortunately, Sho was so generous with his insight into the art world, and he had a lot of knowledge and experience to share. So yeah, thank you, Sho, for doing the interview. Thank you, Destination Specialist, for sponsoring the podcast. And the music from this podcast is Piano March by Audionautics. Again, consider supporting us on patreon.com, patreon.com/032. Or if you want to help the podcast, but maybe you don't want to shell out some of that moolah, that money, that thing that, pays the bills, puts food on the table, puts a roof over your head. I get it. So simply, if you want to help. If you don't want to help, if you don't like this podcast, whatever. Doesn't matter. But if you do want to help, share this podcast online. Share it on social media. Tell a friend. Tell one friend. Tell one friend about it. The more listeners we get, the more likely we can continue doing this podcast. New episode next Tuesday. Bye!